Imagine opening a flight tracking map and noticing a plane in the sky that almost never appears during normal wars. A plane that carries no bombs, no soldiers, no cargo. A plane that exists for only one reason: to keep the nuclear launch system alive if the world below it is already burning. Surprised. And suddenly that plane starts flying repeatedly during an active conflict. That is exactly what analysts began noticing over the last days. Size. The aircraft is called the E-6B Mercury, but inside military circles it has another name: the Doomsday plane. Since the very day this war began, aviation observers tracking military flights have documented multiple E-6B takeoffs. The first unusual movement appeared on February 28th. Then on March 2nd, something even more striking happened. Two of these aircraft were flying at the same time. One leaving the Gulf Coast heading toward Naval Air Station Patuxent River in Maryland. Another lifting off from Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, one of the most sensitive command locations in the American nuclear command structure. After that, more flights followed, routes stretching toward the Atlantic, toward Europe, and toward the Middle East. Each time journalists asked the Pentagon about the activity, the answer was short and identical: operational security, no comment. And that silence immediately triggered a bigger question that analysts are now asking everywhere. Why is the aircraft designed to preserve America's nuclear command chain suddenly appearing during a regional war? To understand why this matters, you need to know what the E-6B Mercury actually does. Despite its terrifying nickname, it is not a bomber. It carries no weapons. Its mission is communication, but not ordinary communication. Nuclear command communication. Every nuclear weapon in the United States arsenal depends on one final step before it can ever be used: a direct order from the National Command Authority. That order normally travels through satellites, command centers, secure networks, and underground facilities. But those systems share one dangerous weakness: they can be destroyed. If enough communication nodes are taken out during a massive strike, the chain of command could break. The E-6B Mercury exists to prevent that. It is essentially a flying command center built on a modified Boeing 707. It can fly nearly 7,000 miles, stay airborne for days with refueling, and transmit extremely low-frequency signals to nuclear submarines hidden deep under the ocean. Even if ground infrastructure were destroyed, this aircraft could still deliver the order that launches intercontinental ballistic missiles anywhere on Earth. Now it is important to say this clearly: the E-6B does not only fly during crises. These aircraft regularly conduct training missions. Increased flights do not automatically mean nuclear weapons are about to be used, but context matters. These flights began on the exact day the war started and continued throughout the first 10 days of fighting. And they are happening while the battlefield situation is becoming more complicated than many expected. Iranian missiles have struck several American bases in the Gulf region. Reports indicate Russia is sharing intelligence about U.S. troop locations. American officials say China has been supplying drone components to Iran. And at the same time, several Gulf countries hosting major American bases have publicly stated that their territory should not be used to launch offensive strikes against Iran. Qatar said it clearly. The UAE said the same. Kuwait and Saudi Arabia have avoided joining any offensive campaign. That means the United States has forces across the region, but some of the governments hosting those bases are drawing strict limits around how those facilities can be used. Meanwhile, the economic pressure of the conflict is rising quickly. Estimates in Washington suggest the war is costing nearly $900 million per day. If the conflict continues for months, that number climbs into the hundreds of billions. Energy markets are watching every development nervously because two of the most critical maritime routes on the planet sit directly inside the potential escalation zone: the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea shipping corridor. If those routes were disrupted simultaneously, the global oil system could face an enormous shock. And this is the environment in which the Doomsday plane is now flying more frequently. If you are following this story closely, subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because signals like this often appear quietly before major geopolitical turning points. So does the presence of the E-6B Mercury mean nuclear weapons are about to be used? Most serious military analysts say almost certainly not. Iran does not possess the kind of nuclear arsenal that would normally trigger such a decision, but the flights may still carry meaning. One explanation is deterrence. Deploying visible pieces of the nuclear command system sends a message to everyone watching, allies, adversaries, and neutral powers, that escalation will be answered with escalation. The second explanation is less comforting. Some analysts believe the flights reflect uncertainty inside strategic planning circles. Reports suggest there is still no clear long-term endgame for the conflict. And when military planners face uncertainty, they often activate additional layers of readiness, just in case events move faster than expected. And that is why this aircraft is drawing so much attention. Inside, it are 22 crew members and a system designed to keep the nuclear command chain alive even if everything on the ground fails. No bombs, no missiles, just the ability to transmit the order that could unleash the most destructive weapons humanity has ever created. The Doomsday plane was built for the worst scenario imaginable. And right now, it is flying during a war that has barely entered its second week. If you want to keep following where this story goes next, subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because the next developments in this conflict may reveal far more about why that aircraft is in the sky. But here is the part that makes this story truly unsettling. The Doomsday plane is not just flying during a war. It is flying at the exact moment when the entire strategic map of the Middle East is starting to look dangerously unstable. And once you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the aircraft in the sky begins to feel less like a technical precaution and more like a signal that something much larger could be forming behind the scenes. Because wars are never decided only by missiles and bombs. They are shaped by energy routes, alliances, shipping lanes, intelligence networks, and political pressure spreading across the global system. And right now, almost every one of those systems is under stress at the same time. At the center of that tension sits one of the most important energy corridors on Earth, the Persian Gulf. Every day, millions of barrels of oil move through the Strait of Hormuz toward Asia, Europe, and the United States. At its narrowest point, the passage is only about 30 miles wide. On one side sits Iran. On the other side sits some of the largest oil exporters in the world. If that corridor were disrupted even briefly, the consequences would ripple across global markets within hours. Insurance prices for tankers would jump, shipping routes would shift, and oil traders would begin pushing prices upward long before a single tanker was actually stopped. But the Gulf is only half of the equation, because to the south lies another fragile corridor, the Red Sea route connecting the Indian Ocean to the Suez Canal. If Houthi forces in Yemen resume attacks on commercial shipping, that route could become dangerous as well. And suddenly, the world faces a scenario that strategists quietly discuss in closed meetings. The Strait of Hormuz under pressure from Iran, and the Red Sea under pressure from the Houthis at the same time. Two of the most critical trade arteries on the planet squeeze simultaneously. The global economy is not designed to easily absorb that kind of shock. Oil prices could surge rapidly. Supply chains would feel the strain. Energy importing countries would begin opening emergency reserves. And while this economic pressure builds, the geopolitical chessboard is becoming more crowded. Russia has clear incentives to weaken American influence in the region. China depends heavily on Gulf oil for its industrial economy and watches every development closely. European economies rely on stable shipping routes after years of energy disruptions. Each of these powers is calculating its own response while the conflict continues to evolve. That is why many analysts say the most worrying factor is not the fighting itself, but the absence of a clear endgame. Wars without defined limits have a habit of expanding slowly and unpredictably. A week becomes a month. New actors begin supplying intelligence, weapons, or financial support. Maritime routes become contested. Airspace restrictions multiply. And gradually, a regional conflict begins pulling larger parts of the global system into its orbit. Inside Washington, the pressure is also growing. Modern wars are incredibly expensive, and the financial cost accumulates quickly as deployments expand. Carrier strike groups operating in the region require massive logistical support. Advanced aircraft and bombers depend on complex infrastructure across multiple bases. Every day the conflict continues, the economic and political cost grows heavier. And that is why some analysts believe the flights of the Doomsday plane are less about immediate nuclear escalation and more about strategic signaling. When a nation activates parts of its nuclear command system, it sends a message to every actor watching the conflict. The message is simple. escalation still has another level. It is a reminder that the most powerful military capabilities remain available even if they are never intended to be used. But there is another interpretation that military planners quietly consider as well: preparation for worst-case scenarios. Not because those scenarios are expected tomorrow, but because responsible strategists prepare for possibilities long before they appear in public discussions. What happens if the conflict expands? What if more states become involved? What if communication networks or command infrastructure become vulnerable during a sudden escalation? In moments like that, redundancy becomes critical. And that is exactly what aircraft like the E-6B Mercury provide: a flying guarantee that the chain of command cannot disappear even if the ground systems fail. And that is the symbolism that makes analysts pause. A Cold War aircraft designed for the most catastrophic nuclear scenarios, now quietly operating during a modern conflict that many believed would remain limited. Its presence does not mean nuclear war is imminent, but it does mean the people responsible for managing this conflict are thinking several steps ahead of the headlines most people see. And that raises a deeper question that observers are beginning to ask more often. How long can this war remain contained? Because even 10 days into the conflict, the situation already includes missile exchanges, intelligence cooperation between rival powers, economic pressure on global energy routes, and hesitation among regional allies. None of these elements alone guarantees escalation, but together they create the kind of complex environment where a single miscalculation can suddenly change the entire trajectory of a war. And somewhere above the clouds, that aircraft continues its quiet patrol. 22 crew members inside a flying command center maintaining communication links designed for the worst day imaginable. No dramatic announcements, no official explanation beyond operational security. Just a system built to function when everything else fails. The Doomsday plane was created as a safeguard for the most extreme scenario in human history. And yet it is flying during a conflict that may only be beginning to reveal its true shape. So the real question may not be whether that aircraft will ever need to perform its ultimate mission. The real question may be why the people directing this war believe it is important for that capability to be in the air right now. What do they see on the strategic horizon that the rest of the world has not yet fully understood? And how might the next few weeks reshape the balance of power across the entire region? If you want to keep following how this story unfolds, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments, because the next developments could reveal far more about where this conflict is truly heading.